When we ended part 6, the British Empire had survived the First World War. In fact, it was now larger than ever. On paper, Britain ruled around a quarter of the world's land and almost a quarter of its population. To many people, the empire looked permanent. In 1924, millions visited the British Empire exhibition at Wembley. It celebrated Britain's global reach, its trade, its industries, and the nations that made up the empire. Back home, confidence remained high, but appearances can be deceptive. Beneath the surface, something fundamental had changed. Across the empire, more and more people were beginning to ask the same question. Why should Britain rule us? The years between the two world wars would transform the empire, not because Britain suddenly became weak, but because nationalism was becoming stronger. For many people, this wasn't simply about opposing Britain. It was about believing that their own nations should govern themselves. Nowhere was that more visible than in India. A lawyer named Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi had returned from South Africa, where he experienced racial discrimination and developed a philosophy he called Satyagraha, the power of non-violent resistance. Instead of fighting with weapons, Gandhi believed ordinary people could challenge injustice through peaceful protest, civil disobedience, and refusing to cooperate with laws they believed were unjust. It was a revolutionary idea. In 1920, Gandhi launched the non-cooperation movement. Millions of Indians boycotted British goods, resigned from government jobs, withdrew from British-run schools, and rejected many colonial institutions. For perhaps the first time, Britain faced a nationwide movement that challenged its authority without raising an army. Then, in 1930, came one of the most famous protests in modern history, the Salt March. British law prevented Indians from producing or selling their own salt, forcing them to buy heavily taxed salt controlled by the colonial government. Gandhi walked more than 200 miles to the Arabian Sea and picked up a handful of natural salt. It was a simple act, but it openly defied British law. Thousands followed his example. More than 60,000 people were arrested. Images of peaceful protesters being arrested spread around the world, placing Britain's rule under increasing international scrutiny. Britain was not simply refusing to change. In 1935, it passed the Government of India Act, creating elected provincial governments, expanding the electorate, and giving Indians greater responsibility for governing their own affairs. But for many nationalists, it no longer went far enough. It's also important to remember that India was never politically united behind a single vision. While Gandhi and the Indian National Congress became the best-known face of the independence movement, other political organizations and communities had different ideas about India's future. Those divisions would become increasingly important in the years ahead. India was not alone. In Ireland, the War of Independence ended with the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921. Most of Ireland became the Irish Free State in 1922, while 6 counties in the north remained part of the United Kingdom. Partition ended one conflict, but it also created tensions that would shape British and Irish history for generations. In Egypt, Britain recognized Egyptian independence in 1922, although it continued to maintain significant influence, particularly over the strategically vital Suez Canal. Meanwhile, Britain was also administering former Ottoman territories under the League of Nations mandates, including Iraq and Palestine. Supporters argued these territories were being prepared for eventual self-government. Critics argued they were simply colonies under a different name. By the late 1930s, Britain's mandate for Palestine was already facing growing unrest as tensions between Arab and Jewish communities erupted into the Arab Revolt, creating yet another challenge for British rule. Across Africa and Southeast Asia, nationalist movements were also becoming more organized. The pressure was no longer isolated. It was spreading across the empire. Yet something else was happening too. not every part of the empire was moving towards independence in the same way. Countries such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and the Irish Free State were becoming increasingly self-governing. The Statute of Westminster, passed in 1931, recognized that these dominions could make their own laws without Britain's approval. The empire wasn't simply breaking apart. In many places, it was evolving into a partnership between self-governing nations, laying the foundations for what would later become the modern Commonwealth. Ironically, some of Britain's own successes helped fuel the rise of nationalism. Education expanded, universities grew, civil services became more professional. Many of the future leaders who would campaign for independence had themselves been educated within institutions established during British rule. Then came another blow, the Great Depression. Then came another blow, the Great Depression. Beginning in 1929, world trade collapsed, businesses failed, unemployment soared, governments everywhere struggled. An empire built on global commerce suddenly became far more expensive to maintain. Britain responded by trying to strengthen trade within the empire through agreements such as the 1932 Ottawa Conference, hoping closer economic ties would help hold the empire together. But economics alone could not stop the political tide. By the late 1930s, King George V had been succeeded by George VI, but the British monarch still carried the title Emperor of India. On maps, the British Empire still looked as powerful as ever, but maps can be deceptive. Empires rarely collapse because of one battle. More often, they slowly lose the consent of the people they govern. The greatest challenge to the British Empire was no longer coming from rival European powers. It was coming from the people living inside it. And then, in 1939, the world went to war again. And this time, the British Empire would never recover. And that's where we're going in part 8. Stay tuned.